Dungeons & Dragons. One of my favorite games to play with friends, and one of my least favorites to bring up on a first date. Well, granted, it has gone a long way from being a niche hobby for Satan worshippers. With its recent resurgence in popularity, it's practically become a household name. Though, I feel like we don't question the name Dungeons & Dragons as much as we ought to. The dungeons part is simple enough. Throughout a D&D game, the players encountering a dungeon is practically inevitable. It doesn't have to be an in-use dungeon with prisoners beneath a castle or even a spider-infested cave. Pretty much any setting where the players are unsafe can be classified as a dungeon. The dragons part seems even more straightforward. Sometimes they breathe fire, sometimes they fly. Everyone knows what a dragon is. But unless you're running a campaign specifically about the mythical creature, there's no real guarantee that there be dragons at all. In fact, as the dungeon master of my own group of friends, I've only included about 3 dragons ever in my games. The definitive inspiration for D&D, The Lord of the Rings, only really features 1 dragon. So, what makes it so special as to deserve a spot in the title, besides the catchy alliteration? Why do we care? And why are dragons so important?
The history of dragons in the role-playing game goes back to before it was even titled Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, it goes into the creator of the game, Gary Gygax, and his love of miniature wargaming. Wargames are simulations of either real past battles or potential battles, used initially for military use, but were later used as recreation, as civilians found the exercise fun. Gygax specifically was involved in groups that would meet up in person to play these simulated battles around complex 2-scale models of the location, with miniature soldiers to do battle within it. In 1968, Gary Gygax was inspired by witnessing a medieval-style wargame to create his own medieval wargame with a set of rules that he wrote up. He adapted and changed and added to these rules until in 1971 he published an official rule set for wargaming that he called Chainmail: Rules for Medieval Miniatures. However, as he continued to expand and play with his new rule set, it seemed as though his players were getting bored of the knights and castles of his setting. So, as the last-minute addition to the pamphlet, he added fantasy rules, with wizards, monsters, magic, and yes, dragons. Because of the popularity of this small supplement to those rules, Dungeons & Dragons was created originally as a further expansion of the chainmail system. Surprisingly, most of what we know about dragons in D&D originated from those early versions of the game. Before chainmail even, Gary Gygax laid out ground rules for various types of the major colors of dragons, whose basic abilities have gone largely unchanged in the 50-plus years since he laid them out for the first time. In fact, dragons seem to be one of the sole uniting forces in all of published canon. Since there have been many worlds and settings over D&D's history, it's tough to pin down definitive lore for the entire series. But in almost every officially published campaign setting, dragons have an important role to play. Most prominently are Bahamut and Tiamat, who are draconic gods of good and evil respectively in D&D canon across all the worlds the games have created. Based on depictions in disparate Middle East mythos, the 2 dragons are siblings created by Io, the dragon deity of creation. Bahamut is a massive dragon with platinum scales, represents law and justice, alongside his lesser kin, the metallic dragons. Tiamat, on the other hand, is a 5-headed dragon with aspects of chaos and greed, and each head the color of her evil chromatic dragons. The 2 were meant to rule together and balance each other out, but their personalities were too different, and they swiftly became rivals, and then enemies. While Bahamut often lives among mortals in secret and seeks peace with all life, Tiamat is feared by both her own kind and any that know of her tyranny. It's a pretty clear-cut battle of light and darkness, but there is evidence that suggests a different history. Fizban's Treasury of Dragons is the newest addition to the Dungeons & Dragons rulebooks, and is almost exclusively about dragons. So, it's a good place to start, halfway through the script. Curiously, its lore doesn't say anything about Io or his other names. Instead, it credits these strange siblings as the beings that created the universe in a poem titled The Elegy for the First World. The elegy starts with Tiamat and Bahamut as partners, creating the firstborn dragon, Sarduar, who then helped to create the dragons and a paradise for them to live. This paradise was the first world, and it's insinuated to be the original version of the material plane, or what is essentially Earth in D&D lore. The gods were jealous of this paradise, so they sought to conquer the newly formed dragons and take the world for their own followers. In an ensuing battle, both Tiamat and Bahamut were defeated, and Tiamat was captured and tortured by the invaders. The gods had won, and sent their people, who would become the humans, elves, dwarfs, and everyone else you choose to play as. Eventually, Tiamat escaped, and in her rage, brought her own army of dragons together to destroy the world, shattering it into all the different campaign settings of Dungeons & Dragons. This is a lot, but the most important thing is that it puts a huge spotlight on the role of dragons within the franchise. To view this poem as the true origin of the universe not only changes the relationship between Bahamut and Tiamat, but the relationship between dragons and everything else. The book explains that Bahamut and Tiamat are not gods, because gods exist as spirits. The followers of the gods, us humans, are partial spirits, aren't fully from the earth, and thus don't completely belong here. Only the dragons, the sole creatures to be purely existent in the material plane, are the ones that come from Earth that we all live on. In other words, dragons are fully tangible beings, but the rest of us? It's complicated. So yeah, in D&D lore, dragons are actually more real than humans are. This all goes to show how D&D has used dragons, but it doesn't answer our first question, does it? After all, this lore is fairly obscured and is not relevant to the majority of adventures. The players are still just as likely to encounter anything else. So, why is the most popular role-playing game even named after them? Well, I think the answer lies in how we view dragons as a culture. Dragons are some of the most ubiquitous symbols of mythology we can define, existing across almost every culture in the world. While the dragons in Dungeons & Dragons are most often inspired by European ideas of the creature, in part owing to the often Eurocentric idea of the medieval era, each culture has a different idea of big lizard. Most ideas of a dragon come from a place of near insurmountable strength and/or magical prowess, and are often massive reptiles or amphibians with deep ties to the water. Dragons are notably wise due to their long-lived history and often godlike powers, but can be remarkably human in their mannerisms and faults. As briefly mentioned before, Bahamut and Tiamat themselves both come from real-life mythology. In Arabic mythology, Bahamut is a sea creature of incomprehensible size, such that the earth is not much more than a small marble on its back. Tiamat is a bit more complex, but in basic terms, she is a serpent goddess from Babylonian legend, born of salt water that tries to kill and is inevitably defeated by Marduk, a younger god. As a side note, Dungeons & Dragons does link these myths with a module that names Marduk as an aspect of Bahamut. While the two stories are very different from each other, and from their role in the game, the message is clear. Naming something a dragon is a pretty easy way to mark significant danger or incredible power.
So, maybe it's not about what makes dragons important to D&D, but what makes dragons important to us. Everyone in the world could recognize a dragon and what it means, so using it as a symbol makes the game nearly universal. In addition, you can immediately tell what kind of game Dungeons & Dragons is at a glance. A noble knight, a wise wizard, or a clever thief, fighting against insurmountable evil and great beasts. trekking through dangerous forests or ancient temples. Not every game will have a dungeon to conquer, or even fewer will have a dragon to slay. But these words carry with it the spirit of adventure, the prospect of heated battle, in a way that's contained within the lore itself, as well as how we understand mythology as a whole. Now take care as the light fades tonight, traveler, for the road is dark and fraught with danger. But while you keep your wits about for thieves and drunkards, train an eye on the horizon, for you never know what manner of beasts lie beyond the city walls.